Part 3 of chapter 5. Aaron wanted to close his eyes and not think about anything for a while, but Miriam was upset and would not allow him any peace. I've come to accept Zipporah. She paced, agitated, cheeks flushed. I've been the one taking care of her all this time. I've been the one seeing to her needs. I've been the one who's done everything. Not that she has shown any particular appreciation. She's never tried to learn our language. She still relies on Eleazar to translate. Aaron knew why she was upset too. He too had been surprised when Moses told him he was taking another wife, but he had not seen fit to comment on it. Miriam had never had such inhibitions, though Aaron doubted she had spoken to Moses yet. He needs a wife, Miriam, someone who can see to the needs of the household. A wife? Why does Moses need a wife other than Zipporah when he has me? I saw to everything before that Cushite entered his tent. He welcomed my help in the beginning so that I could take care of his wife. Zipporah couldn't do anything without help. And now that she is dying, he's taken another wife. Why does he need a wife at his age? You should have talked him out of this marriage before he took that foreigner into his tent. You should have said something to keep him from sinning against the Lord. Had Moses sinned? I was too surprised when Moses told me. Just surprised. He's not so old he doesn't need the comfort of a woman. Aaron sometimes wished he could take another wife, but after mediating between his mother and his sons and Miriam for years, he decided it was wiser to remain chaste. Moses seldom spent time with Zipporah, and now he has this woman. Miriam threw her hands in the air. I wonder if he listens to what the Lord says. If he must have a wife, and I don't see why he must at his age, he should have chosen a wife from among the women of the tribe of Levi. Hasn't the Lord told us not to marry outside our tribes? Have you seen how foreign that Cushite is? She is black, Aaron, blacker than any Egyptian I ever saw. Aaron had been troubled about Moses's marriage, but not for Miriam's reasons. The woman had been a slave to one of the Egyptians who had come with the people out of Egypt. Her mistress had died during the festival of the golden calf, and the Cushite had continued to travel among the people. As far as Aaron knew, she bowed down before the Lord, but still. Why do you just sit there and say nothing, Aaron? You are a servant of the Lord, aren't you? You are his high priest. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Didn't the Lord direct me when I spoke to Pharaoh's daughter? Did the Lord not give me the words? And the Lord called you, Aaron. You've heard his voice and spoken his word to the people more often than Moses. I've never known Moses to show so little wisdom. Aaron hated when his sister was like this. He felt like a little boy again, ruled by his older sister, overpowered by her personality. She had a will of iron. You should be pleased that you will have less work to do. Pleased? Maybe I would if he hadn't married a Cushite. Don't you care that Moses brings sin on all of us by this unwholesome marriage? What's unwholesome about it? You have to ask, she responded angrily. You go out. Just go to his tent and look at her. Look at her. She should be back with her own people. She does not belong among us, let alone have the honor of being the wife of Israel's deliverer. Aaron wondered if he should talk to Moses. Truly, he had been taken aback when Moses took a Cushite slave and woman into his tent. Perhaps he should speak with some of the elders before he approached his brother. What did the people think of Moses's marriage? Miriam would not keep her thoughts to herself for long. Doubts filled Aaron. Miriam had tried to warn him about Nadab and Abihu, and he hadn't listened to her. Is he making another mistake now by not listening to his sister and standing against Moses's decision to marry again? Go out to the tabernacle, all three of you. The hair rose on the back of Aaron's neck. He raised his head, fear of the voice. Miriam straightened and tilted her chin. Her eyes glowed. The Lord has called me to the tabernacle, and you as well, if I can tell by the look on your face. She walked out of the tent, standing in the sunlight. She looked back at him. Well, are you coming or not? Moses was waiting for them, perplexed. The clouds swirled overhead and compressed, descending. Miriam looked up, her face flushed and tense with excitement. You'll see now, Aaron. He shook as the pillar of cloud stood at the entrance of the tabernacle, and the voice came from within the cloud. Now listen to me. Even with prophets, I, the Lord, communicate by visions and dreams, but that is not how I communicate with my servant Moses. He is entrusted with my entire house. I speak to him face to face, directly, and not in riddles. He sees the Lord as he is. Should you not be afraid to criticize him? The pillar of thick mist rose, and Aaron felt the deep anguish of his sin once more. He hung his head, ashamed. Miriam drew her breath in a soft shriek. Her face and hands were streaked white like a stillborn baby coming from its mother's womb, her flesh half eaten away. She fell to her knees, screaming and throwing dirt over her head. Oh, Aaron wailed in terror. He turned to Moses, hands outstretched, shaking. Oh, my Lord, please don't punish us for the sins we have so foolishly committed. Fear ran cold in his veins. Horrified, Moses was already crying out to the Lord, begging for mercy on behalf of his older sister. And the voice came for all three to hear. If her father had spit in her face, wouldn't she have been defiled for 7 days? Banish her from the camp for 7 days, and after that, she may return. Sobbing, Miriam fell to her knees and prostrated herself before the Lord. Her outstretched, sickly white hands became strong and brown again, worn from years of hard work. She put her hands near Moses' feet, but did not touch him. Aaron bent toward her, but Miriam drew back sharply. You must not touch me. She rose clumsily and backed away. The leprosy was gone, but her dark eyes were awash with tears and her cheeks red with humiliation. She drew her veil across her face and bent toward Moses. Forgive me, brother. Please forgive me. Oh, Miriam, my sister. Aaron felt her shame like a mantle on his own back. He should have told her to be silent, to stop gossiping about anyone, especially Moses, whom God had chosen to deliver Israel. Instead, he had allowed himself to be swayed by her words and had joined in her rebellion. People had come out of their tents and stood staring. Some came closer to see what was going on. Unclean, Miriam cried as she hurried toward the edge of the camp. I'm unclean. The people drew back from her as though she carried plague. Some wailed. Children fled for their mother's tent. Unclean, Miriam ran, stumbling in her shame, but did not fall. Aaron's throat tightened. Was he destined to fail the Lord, to fail Moses in everything he did? When he didn't listen, Abihu and Nadab died. When he did listen, his sister bore leprosy on his lack of perception. He should be on the one living on the outside of the camp. He had known better than to heed her jealousy. Instead, he'd given in to her, and he had allowed her to fan his own unanswered dreams of leadership. Every time he tried to step out ahead, disaster fell, not only on him, but on those he loved. Aaron, the tenderness in his brother's voice made Aaron's heart ache even more. Why did God spare me when it was as much my sin as hers? Would you have grieved as deeply if the discipline had fallen on you? Your heart is soft, Aaron. And so is my head. He looked at his brother. I wanted her to sway me, Moses. I've struggled with my role as the older brother who must stand aside for his younger. I have not wanted to feel those things, Moses. But I'm just a man. Pride is my enemy. I know. I do love you, Moses. I know. Aaron shut his eyes tightly. And now Miriam suffers while I go about my priestly duties? We will all wait until her time of quarantine is over. Before the pillar of fire warmed the chill desert air, all of the nation of Israel would know how he and Miriam had sinned. It would soon be time for the evening sacrifice. Lord, have mercy. My sins are heavy upon me. When the 7 days had passed and Miriam returned to camp, the pillar of cloud rose and led the people away from Hazeroth. The cloud stopped over the wilderness of Paran, and the people camped there at Kadesh. Aaron and his sons and the clans of the Levites set up the tent and the tabernacle, and the tribes set up their camps in their designated areas around the tent. Everyone knew their place and responsibility, and the people were quickly settled. Moses received instructions from the Lord and gave Aaron a list of 12 men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, excluding Levi, whose duties centered around the worship of the Lord. Aaron sent for the tribal representative and stood before Moses when the instructions were given. You were to go to Canaan and explore the lands the Lord is giving us. Aaron saw excitement flood Joshua's face, for he was the man chosen to represent the half-tribe of Ephraim, son of Joseph. Some of the others looked frightened by their assignment. They had no provision, no maps, no experience for spying out the strengths and weaknesses of their enemy. Most were young men like Joshua, but there was one other older than the rest and unshaken by the task before him, Caleb. Moses walked among them, putting his hand on each man's shoulder as he passed by, his voice filled with confidence. Go northward toward the Negev into the hill country. See what the land is like and find out whether the people living there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? Do their towns have walls or are they unprotected? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there many trees? Moses paused when he reached Joshua. He clasped his hand, looked into the younger man's face. Releasing Joshua's hand, he turned to the others. Enter the land boldly and bring back samples of the crops you see. Each man was given a water bag. They would not have manna during the time they were away from the camp. They would have to eat whatever the land of Canaan had to offer. And the people waited. A week passed, then another and another. A new moon came and still the spies did not return. How far had they gone? Had they met with resistance? Had some been killed? And if they'd been taken as captives and executed, what then? Aaron encouraged his people to be patient and trust the Lord to fulfill his promise. He prayed unceasingly for the 12 spies, Joshua often foremost in his mind. He knew the younger man mattered greatly to Moses, for his brother often spoke of him with affection. I know of no other like him, Aaron. He is dedicated to the Lord. Nothing will sway him. How sad that Moses' own sons and brothers should fall so short. Aaron no longer resented Joshua. He knew his own weakness and felt his age. Younger men would have to step into leadership if people were to be hedged and guided into their inheritance. They're coming. I see them. The men are returning. Excited cries filled the camp as family members surrounded the returning spies, overladen with samples of what Canaan had to offer. Laughing, Joshua and Caleb had a pole stretched between their shoulders, and on it was one cluster of grapes. Blankets were opened, spilling out bright red pomegranates and purple figs. Joshua spoke first, directing his words to Moses. We arrived in this land you sent us to see, and it is indeed a magnificent country. Caleb raised his hands jubilant. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. And here's just some of the fruit as proof. Milk and honey, Aaron thought. That meant there were herds of cattle and goats and fruit trees that flowered in the spring. There would be fields of wildflowers and plenty of water. But the other spies focused on other things. The people living there are powerful, and their cities and towns are fortified and large. We also saw descendants of Anak who are living there. A low rumble of fear went through the listeners. The Anaks were giants, warriors who knew no fear and showed no mercy. The Amalekites live in the Negev. Caleb turned. They're cowards who attack from behind and kill those who are too weak to defend themselves. What about the Hittites? They're fierce warriors. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country. The Canaanites live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan Valley. They're too strong for us. Caleb's eyes blazed. Is anyone too strong for the Lord? Let's go at once and take the land. We certainly can conquer it. Aaron looked at Moses, but his brothers said nothing. Aaron wanted to cry out that the Lord had promised the land, and therefore the Lord would see to it that they conquered it. But he had not been among the spies to see everything. He was an old man, not a warrior. Moses was God's chosen leader, so Aaron waited, edgy, for Moses to decide, but his brother turned away and went into his tent. Several spies shouted, "We can't go up against them. They're stronger than we are." Caleb's face was flushed with anger. Canaan is the land God promised us. It's ours for the taking. How can you be so sure? Hasn't God been killing us one by one ever since we left Egypt? With thirst and hunger and plagues, 10 of the spies left, and the people followed after them. Caleb faced Aaron. Why didn't Moses speak for us? Why didn't you? I am only his spokesman. His spokesman, Moses, always seeks the will of the Lord and then instructs me in what I'm to say. The Lord has already told us what he wills, Caleb pointed out angrily. Go and take the land. He stalked away, shaking his head. Aaron looked at Joshua. The younger man's shoulders were slumped and his eyes were shut. Rest, Joshua. Perhaps tomorrow the Lord will tell Moses what we are to do. There will be trouble. Joshua looked at him. Caleb is right. The land is ours. God has said so. But by the next morning, Aaron was hearing the rumors. The land would swallow up any who went into it. All the people living there were huge. There were even giants among them. The spies had felt like grasshoppers next to them. The people would be squashed like little bugs if they dared enter Canaan. But the Lord said, no one was listening to what the Lord had said. No one believed. We wish we'd have died in Egypt or even here in the wilderness. Why is the Lord taking us into this country only to have us die in battle? We're not warriors. Our wives and little ones will be carried off as slaves. Let's get out of here and return to Egypt. Egypt is destroyed. There's nothing for us there. The people fear us. We will be their masters for a change. Yeah, let's go back. Then we need a new leader. Aaron saw the rage in their faces, their clenched fists. He was afraid, but less of them than he was of what God would do in the sight of this open rebellion. Moses fell face down before the people, and Aaron dropped down beside him, close enough that if it became necessary, he could use his body to shield Moses. He could hear Caleb and Joshua shouting to the people, the land we explored was a wonderful land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he'll bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Don't rebel against the Lord. Don't be afraid of the people of the land. They're only helpless prey to us. They have no protection because the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. The people grew more and more enraged with their words and shouted against them. Stone them! Who are you to speak to us, Caleb? You would lead us into death, Joshua. Kill them. Screams rent the air. Aaron felt the strange prickling down his back once again and looked up. The glorious presence rose into the air above the tabernacle. Moses stood, head thrown back, arms raised. The people scattered, running for their tents as if goatskins could hide them. Joshua and Caleb remained where they were, their beards whipped by the wind. Moses stepped forward, but Lord, what will the Egyptians think when they hear about it? They know full well the power you displayed in rescuing these people from Egypt. Oh Lord, hear his prayer. Aaron went down on his face again, for the lives of the people were at stake. Lord, Lord, hear my brother. Oh Lord, no, Moses cried out in horror. The inhabitants of this land know, Lord, that you have appeared in full view of your people in the pillar of the cloud that hovers over them. They know that you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you slaughter these people, the nations that have heard your fame will say, the Lord was not able to bring them into the land he swore to give them, so he killed them in the wilderness. Please, Lord, prove that your power is as great as you have claimed it to be. For you said the Lord is slow to anger and rich in unfailing love, forgiving every kind of sin and rebellion. Even so, he does not leave the guilty unpunished, but he punishes the children for the sins of their parents to the third and fourth generations. Please pardon the sins of this people because of your magnificent, unfailing love, just as you've always forgiven them ever since they left Egypt. Moses fell silent. Aaron raised his head enough to peer up at his brother standing, arms still outstretched, palms up. After a long while, Moses' arms lowered to his sides and he let out a long, deep sigh. The glorious presence came down once again and rested within the temple. Aaron stood slowly. What did the Lord say? Only 2 men were standing near where Caleb and Joshua sat, silent and terrified. Have the people gather, Aaron. I can only bear to say it once. The people came quietly, tense and afraid, for all had seen the glorious presence standing above and had felt the heat of wrath. They remembered too late how easily God could take the lives of those who rebelled against him. And the Lord's anger was in Moses' voice as he spoke God's word to the people. The Lord will do to you the very things you said against him. You will all die here in this wilderness because you have complained against him. None of you who are 20 years old or older and were counted in the census will enter the land the Lord swore to give you. The only exceptions will be Caleb and Joshua. You said your children would be taken captive, and the Lord says he will bring them safely into the land, and they will enjoy what you have despised. But as for you, your dead bodies will fall in this wilderness. You and your children will be like shepherds wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. In this way, they will pay for your faithlessness until the last one of you lies dead in the wilderness, because the men who explored the land were there for 40 days. You must wander the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day of suffering the consequences of your sin. You will discover what it is like to have the Lord for your enemy. Tomorrow, we set out for the wilderness. The people wailed. The 12 men who had gone to the land to explore it were standing in front of the lines of people. 10 of them groaned in pain and fell to their knees, rolling in agony. They died where all could see them, near the entrance to the great tent that held the tabernacle of the Lord. Only Caleb and Joshua remained standing. Aaron wept in his tent, feeling he had somehow failed again. Would things have been different if he'd have stood with Joshua and Caleb? Was the Lord saying even he and Moses would never see the land promised? When Miriam and his sons tried to console him, he left them and went outside to sit with Moses. So close, Moses' voice was filled with sorrow. They were all so close to all they've ever dreamed of having. Fear is the enemy. Fear of the Lord would have been their greatest strength. In him is the victory. Eleazar ran into the tent early the next morning. Father, come quickly. Some of the men are leaving the tent. Leaving? Aaron went cold. Did these people never learn? They say they're going to Canaan. They say they're sorry they sinned, but now they're ready to take the land God promised them. Aaron hurried out, but Moses was already there, crying out at them to stop. It's too late. Why are you now disobeying the Lord's orders to return to the wilderness? It won't work. Do not go to the land now. You will only be crushed by your enemies because the Lord is not with you. Joshua and Caleb and the others faithful had joined them, trying to block their way. The Lord is with us. We are the sons of Abraham. The Lord said the land is ours. Heads high, they turned their backs on Moses, headed for Canaan. Moses cried out one last time in warning. The Lord will abandon you because you have abandoned the Lord. When none turned away from certain disaster, Moses sighed wearily. Prepare the camp. Go about your duties as the Lord has assigned. We're leaving today. The Lord was taking them back to the place where they thought they had left Egypt behind, the Red Sea. And that's the end of part 3.